helped me put together this presentation for you guys. I will say that there were a lot of responses and a ton of topics, so I had to whittle down a lot of them, and if at the end of this presentation you liked it, feel free to tell Crystal. I'd be happy to put on another one and expand upon either the stuff that we talked about tonight or the stuff that we didn't get to. So, a little bit about me first. I'm a naturopathic physician. I graduated from the University of Bridgeport, and prior to that, from the University of Connecticut. I have degrees in nutrition and psychology. I own Wholesome Place, and I'm looking actually right now for a place in the East Longmeadow area to set up because my lovely fiance and I just moved here about 2.5 to 3 months ago. I'm an adjunct professor at Bay Path University, and I've been involved in athletics and yoga for as long as I can remember. If you need to get in contact with me, these are the sites, and for anybody who's interested, I'll send this presentation to your email to review it, because there is a lot of content. I know we're starting a little bit behind schedule here. I'm going to try to be done in about an hour, and then leave a little time for questions. I also want this to be one of the open forums, kind of like a classroom setting, where if I say something and you don't quite understand, or you want a little bit more information, please don't be shy. Put up your hands, ask a question, because I can nearly guarantee you there's going to be somebody else sitting next to you that has the same question. Sound good? Awesome. All right, so today we're going to do a quick overview. We're going to talk about what exactly naturopathic medicine is. One of the questions that I asked in that SurveyMonkey is, do you know what naturopathic medicine is? And there was a number of people who said no. So I'll define that quickly. We're going to go over the principles of a healthy diet, talk about the impact of grains. That's something I saw time and time again. What's the deal with a gluten-free diet? We're going to talk about leaky gut. We're going to talk about food sensitivities and autoimmunity. There's a lot of talk about inflammation and the different types of things that inflammation can cause, whether it be arthritis, autoimmune diseases. So we're going to touch upon that. And then we're going to have a quick little note about supplementation, whether it's from a health standpoint or from improving athletic endeavors. All right? So, naturopathic medicine. I'm standing here in front of you today, naturopathic doctor. My goal as a physician is to identify the root cause of what's going on with people's health. So very rarely do symptoms manifest just because. There's usually a root cause, whether it's a hormonal imbalance, a nutrient deficiency, an infection that isn't being addressed, and then that causes down the road different symptoms to manifest. So I employ diet, hormone balancing, herbal medicine. I do chiropractic manipulation to help readjust the spine, lifestyle counseling, and a couple other more holistic lifestyle type medicine. So take acne, for example. Somebody comes in and they have pimples on their face, pimples on their back. They may be going through hormonal changes during puberty. Most conventional practitioners have two different ways of addressing this. They're given doxycycline, which is an antibiotic, and Accutane. And for the most part, that can work for quite a long time. But the side effects that are associated with both of those drugs are numerous. Accutane can influence bleeding, inflammation. It can cause insomnia, anxiety, depression. Doxycycline can cause permanent tooth discoloration. It can completely screw up the intestinal tract and the probiotics that live there. So these medications, and most of the medications that were conventionally prescribed, are not without risks. Now, I'm not completely against medications. In the right situation, those absolutely need to be employed. But with something like this, where it's a chronic ailment, maybe there's something else going on. So maybe we should ask, is there a hormonal imbalance that's not aligned? Is there a food sensitivity? And we're going to be talking about this. Are there foods coming in through the diet in the digestive tract that are being absorbed into our system without first being broken down? That incites inflammation, and that can manifest as different skin problems, whether it be acne, psoriasis, eczema, rosacea. Is there mental, emotional stress that isn't in check? Is the person potentially hypothyroid? Are they not producing enough thyroid hormone that controls the metabolism of all their tissues? So there's a lot more than just saying, you have acne, here's this medication. You have to take a little bit of a deeper step to be able to determine what that root cause truly is. And that's what I do as a practitioner. So one of the biggest things and the repetitive things that I saw in the SurveyMonkey is, what's a healthy diet? What should I eat? Is vegan good? Is paleo good? So I want to kind of break things down and get back to basics of what a healthy diet really entails. And at the end of the day, every diet that's considered healthy should provide something called nutrient density. So what does that mean? Nutrient density is defined as the amount of nutrients that are in a specific food, meaning all the vitamins, all the minerals, over how many calories that food has. So take a piece of kale, for example. Chock full of nutrients. Magnesium, iron, selenium, zinc, all these things in kale, and not many calories. Maybe 1 calorie per leaf. Very nutrient-dense food. Take a Snickers bar, for example. Ton of calories, not a lot of nutrients. Very nutrient devoid. So at the end of the day, whether you're following paleo, vegetarian, vegan, GAPS diets, the best diet is going to be one that provides adequate nutrition, the majority of the vitamins and minerals. So there's this thing called the Andy score. You ever hear of that before? Anybody ever hear of the Andy scores? Sometimes Whole Foods uses this as an aggregate marker. Basically what it is it's a score that lifts different fruits, vegetables, meats, grain products, and it gives it a score based on its nutrient density. So it literally stands for Aggregate Nutrient Density Index. So you look up here at the top, kale, mustard greens, collards, bok choy, they all have a ton of nutrients, not a lot of calories. So they get a grade A stellar score. And you can mark all these different types of foods, really ranging from anything, and it gets an Andy score. So you base a diet off of these scores, and you're going to be getting essentially a nutrient-rich diet. So what are the importance of these nutrients? What do they really do? How are they helping us? We have many different hormonal systems in our body. I'm going to briefly touch on a couple of those because that was another thing that I saw time and time again. How do I balance out hormones? I'm going into menopause. I want to have kids. How do we promote fertility? So these nutrients are vitally essential to be able to allow proper functioning of these organ systems. They help us produce hormones, neurotransmitters. They're necessary for energy. They promote growth and repair. They provide us with antioxidants so that we can have cancer-fighting chemicals in our system. But let's break this down. In the very center of our brain, we have a gland called the hypothalamus. And that's the master gland. It helps tell us, is there stress in the environment? Is there a lion that we got to run from? How hot are we? How hungry are we? It basically is our sensor for everything that's going on. It communicates with a gland just beneath it called the pituitary. And this is where all of our hormones really start. So if our ovaries need to produce estrogen, the pituitary gland releases a hormone that tells our ovaries to produce estrogen and progesterone. If we're a man, same thing, tells the testes to produce testosterone. And every single hormonal system in the body, whether it be that we're responding to stress and our adrenal glands need to turn on to produce this buffering hormone called cortisol, which I'm sure most people have heard of. Yeah. It all starts up there. But what happens to these glands' ability to be able to tell us to produce these signals if we don't have adequate thiamine, B12, iodine, iron, manganese, all these very specific nutrients? So I can stand up here and I can say, oh, you got to have a nutrient-rich diet, follow the Andy scores. But specifically, these nutrients are allowing these different glands to function appropriately and have our body work the way it should. So I put a couple of these up here just to kind of belabor the point. The thyroid needs selenium, iodine, vitamin D. We're going to talk a little bit about vitamin D, but I can't tell you how many patients I check. Really, it's actually everybody. Everybody who's living in New England, who's at the latitude that we are, can't get enough vitamin D. We'll talk about this later, but to get enough vitamin D, you have to have 80% of your body exposed to the sun for 15 minutes between the months of May and September. Who's doing that? Nobody. So I see across the board deficiency in vitamin D, and that's one vitamin. If you're not enough vitamin D, your thyroid can get off kilter. And I see across the board hypothyroidism. Why? Could be vitamin D, could be a number of other things, but something to consider. The adrenal glands, like I talked about, helps us respond to stress. Not enough vitamin C, not enough B vitamins, and I'm going to make sure you guys know about magnesium before we leave, because that's one of the nutrients that I want to tease out and explain how important that one nutrient is. The pancreas, which helps us digest food, which secretes insulin, needs all these other ones. So again, we need these nutrients for the proper functioning of our hormonal systems. So let's tease out magnesium. What does magnesium do for us? Over 300 biochemical reactions in the body require this essential mineral. It helps us produce energy. It helps our muscles relax. It helps us engage in a deep, restful, restorative sleep. Okay? Insomnia. How does it help with insomnia? Well, it goes up to the brain, it calms down our nerves, and helps promote neurotransmitters in the brain that induce a restful sleep, like melatonin. It protects your heart. It's one of the electrolytes that helps slow down the heartbeat. So if somebody has high blood pressure and they take magnesium, their blood pressure may go down. Another way magnesium can specifically help with the blood pressure is that every single artery that we have through our entire system is surrounded in muscle. And the constriction of that muscle, just like a hose, if you put your finger over the end of the hose, pressure goes up. Release that pressure, allow that artery to dilate, and the pressure goes down. Bone health. Without adequate magnesium, we can't take calcium and put it adequately into the bones. That whole matrix that needs to be in proportion together, create strong, dense bones, gets completely thrown off. We talked about over here, asthma. Same thing as the arteries. There are muscles that surround our airways in our neck. If we hyper-respond to some pollen in the atmosphere, that muscle constricts, we can't breathe. Adequate magnesium can allow that to relax. The reason I'm going over this one deficiency is because look how many things are associated with a deficiency in magnesium. Urinary tract cramps, tight calves and hamstrings. How many people have woken up in the middle of the night with a Charlie horse? Probably at some point, all of us. Maybe we thought it was dehydration. Could be. Could also be magnesium. Headaches, dizziness, confusion, cardiac arrhythmias. How many people have murmurs, heart palpitations, feeling that skipped beat? Yeah, it could be associated with stress, could be associated with anxiety, or we could have anxiety because of a deficiency. Now again, I want to say, this is one mineral. What about vitamin D? What about iron? What about selenium? What about zinc? How do we get all these things? It's that much more important to have a diet that is nutrient-rich, that's going to be supplying us with these incredibly important nutrients. So I put this in here because I couldn't believe it when I saw this, but it kind of makes sense because when I test patients for magnesium, they're pretty much ubiquitously deficient. The pink are females, the red is males. If you look on the x-axis, we have the different age groups, and on the y-axis here, we have the percent of individuals who are not meeting the average daily requirement for magnesium. Let me repeat that. This chart looks at the percentage of people who are not getting enough magnesium. So really, it jacks up here from the ages of 14 to 18. Almost 90% of females are not getting enough magnesium. 19 to 30, it pretty much completely continues all the way to age 70. And again, all these things are associated with deficiency in that one mineral. So how many people are potentially taking high blood pressure medication, insomnia medication, cholesterol medication, anxiety medication for deficiency in one mineral? Could be a lot. In fact, it is a lot because I see it every day. So, why is it? Why are so many people deficient in magnesium? Yeah, question.
Is there a reason that the children age groups were?
Not entirely sure. I do know that their magnesium requirements are a lot less than what they are when you get older. And a lot of times, too, these age groups are not making the decisions of food for themselves. So, yeah.
Which form of magnesium should you take?
Great question. Great question. So there are a ton of different types of magnesium. The most common form of magnesium, which you'll find on the shelves of Walgreens or CVS, is a type called magnesium oxide. Very, very poorly absorbed, so it stays in your intestines and brings water in. Very similar to like lactose for somebody who's lactose intolerant. Great bowel laxative, not good for restoring magnesium. To answer your question, magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate is the one that I typically find to be the best. So why are we so deficient in this one mineral? Well, we can't absorb as much magnesium when we're eating fried food, which is the majority of the American diet. Calcium supplements can actually bind magnesium and prevent us from absorbing it. Alcohol, when we drink, the liver takes magnesium and uses it as a way to detoxify the alcohol from our system, so we actually flush more of it out. Soda, which I hope nobody in here is drinking. And then stress, the adrenal glands. When we produce cortisol to help us respond and buffer stress, that process requires magnesium in order to produce adequate cortisol. So there's a lot of different things that can deplete us, and our food supply is super deficient. So a bunch of studies have been done looking at what is the nutrient content of the food, say, back in 1950 versus today. And time again, across the board, unfortunately, our food is largely deficient in the vitamins and minerals that once used to be in our soils. And there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, we overgrow the soils. We put the exact same crops in, and we, time and time again, deplete the soils of these vital nutrients. And so now we have apples with half the calcium and magnesium content that they did 50 years ago. Another thing that happens is that even if you're making the best choices in the world and going to the grocery store and going to the produce section, all those fruits and vegetables were picked way before they were ripe, so they could ripen on the truck waiting transit to the grocery store. So really, the best place to be buying your fruits and vegetables for the most nutrient density are farmers markets. Small, local places that are picked when they're fully ripe and most likely rotated in soils that once grew kale, then grew spinach, allowed the nutrients to be repleted in the soil, and then had the crops rotate. Am I making sense? Does that make sense? Cool. So magnesium-rich foods, just so you can get an idea. Really, we should be eating, the majority of our diet should be composed of a lot of these types of nutrient-rich foods. Broccoli, maybe you're not going crazy on spearmint, but spinach, Brazil nuts, basil, pine nuts, all those. So a lot of these things that are grown from the soils, like fruits and veggies, those are your main magnesium content foods. Again, I'm belaboring the point for one mineral just so you guys can see the importance of how these nutrient deficiencies can play into our physiology. So, all right, I'm good. Let's go to the grocery store. Let's get some good, healthy, back-to-nature food. Oh, wait a second. There's nothing in it at all. So there's a lot of marketing out there that makes things seem natural, but at the end of the day, you should be doing a little due diligence and looking on the back of packages and seeing, okay, what is really in these foods? And to take that one step further, if you have the ability to look at a package, you probably shouldn't really be eating it all that much. So I wanted to just highlight this point. There's hardly anything in these types of foods. But also, we got very first ingredient, enriched wheat flour, safflower oil, raw sugar, brown rice syrup, which is sugar, leavening, sea salt, soy lecithin. Okay, so it's basically just a quick little grain product. One of the biggest questions I saw time and time again when I was doing that SurveyMonkey was, tell me about grains. Why is this gluten-free diet so good? So we're going to talk about that. Basically, we're going to start off. One of the big things with grains, whether they're rice, wheat, rye, barley, flour, pastas, breads, pizzas, not very nutrient dense at all. Lots of calories, just like I showed you here, hardly any nutrients. But they also contain these things called anti-nutrients. You guys remember the sticky bandits from Home Alone? Very sticky. They put their hand in a they put their hand in the coin jar, and it sticks to all the tape on his hands. Those are anti-nutrients, and they come in the form of really two different things. One are called phytates, and one are called lectins. And these things are predominantly in grains as a way to resist digestion, and they bind to the beneficial vitamins and minerals that we should otherwise be consuming. The reason they have these things is if you look at any animal in the wild, they develop over time ways to resist being killed and to be able to live long enough to pass off their offspring. So they develop talons, and they get teeth, and they become quick. What does grains have? They just sway in the wind. They really have no resistance to being eaten, unless they develop these phytates and lectins, which resist digestion through our digestive tract, so the animal, us, can poop them out and be able to grow wheat or rye or barley in some other place. But these phytates and lectins specifically bind these minerals that we should otherwise be absorbing in our intestines. So we could be eating the healthiest diet in the world, all those magnesium-rich foods, but if that's slapped between two pieces of bread, how much of these vitamins and minerals are we really able to absorb? And number one that they bind, magnesium, and iron and zinc and copper. Another thing, gluten, which is one of the big problems with wheat, is that it's very resistant to many people's ability to digest, whether you have celiac or not. And in the intestines, it basically can act like sandpaper against the cells that line our intestinal walls. And under normal circumstances, these cells here should be right up next to one another. So if you think of a garden hose, the cells that line the inside of that garden hose should not have any gaps. If they do, then they're going to spring a leak. Exactly the same process happens on our intestinal tract. We eat food, goes down our esophagus, we begin digestion. What normally happens is that we have proteins in every food that we consume. And if you imagine that protein looking like a necklace with pearls on it, each one of those pearls are an amino acid. And under normal circumstances, we break off each one of those amino acids at a time. And when that happens, the amino acid can then be absorbed directly through the cell that lines our intestines into our bloodstream to then be made into immune system cells, be built back up into proteins, and so forth. But if we're eating gluten or grains that have phytates and lectins that bind things and create inflammation, these cells break apart. And now we have a sprung leak in that hose. And we absorb this intact necklace. When that happens, our body says, what the hell is this? Because it's not you. It's not a body cell. It's not a body protein. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it a parasite? And it begins to launch an immune attack against that. And in large part, this is incited because of gluten. That is known as leaky gut. Not only are these intact food proteins getting absorbed, which we're going to expand upon in a second, but all those bacteria, good and bad, that are in our intestines are now being absorbed into the bloodstream and burdening our immune system. So what are some of the other things aside from gluten that can cause this? Different shifts in hormones can, pregnancy, menopause, blood sugar issues. So if we're not eating a healthy diet and we're constantly riding a blood sugar roller coaster of simple sugars and then blood sugar crashes and then craving carbs and eating sugars again and then crashing. Other infections, taking antibiotics, these can all cause this leaky gut to happen. So I talked a little bit about gluten. It's found in wheat, barley, rye. One of the reasons, and I don't know if anybody's experienced this before, a lot of people out there know, I don't feel that great when I have gluten. Maybe I have a gluten sensitivity. But then they go over to Italy, and they have pizza and pasta and bread, and they feel fine. So what's the difference? In the United States, we have hybridized and genetically modified the types of wheat that we make so that they're even more hardy and resistant to weathering conditions. Problem is, it's much more hardy and resistant to our digestive tract as well. So if you look at the actual genes in the seed of wheat from Italy versus the United States, the number of genes that code for gluten in ancient types of grains that they use in Italy are 4. There's between 4 and 8 genes that make gluten. In the US, it's over 40. So massively different gluten content in the grains that we are producing here, and that's why so many of us are having issues with gluten. One of the reasons. Sugar. Sugar can also cause leaky gut. So if we're eating a diet that's high in sugar or sodas or refined carbohydrates or ice cream and cakes, that is selectively allowing certain bacteria in our gut, the bacteria that like those types of foods, to proliferate, to grow, and outpace the other good bacteria that likes kale and spinach and collard greens. I hope we recorded that part. So what happens is those types of bacteria then take these simple carbohydrates and they produce gases. And that's when we have farts or flatulence or burping. But the amount of gas that's produced can cause a lot of pressure in those intestinal cells, and they can also cause them to break apart. So if we have a ton of these gases being made and we're chronically gassy and we're having bloating and we're having stomach cramps, it may be in part because we have something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which means that the bacteria that are in our gut have made their way into the small intestines where they shouldn't be, and now have access to all these carbohydrates, simple sugars, and it's fermenting it and creating gases, and that's leading to leaky gut. This is another thing, in addition to gluten, and another infection I'm going to talk about in a moment that can cause this intestinal permeability. Another thing, GMOs. So we see a bunch of talk about GMOs and, oh, GMOs are bad for you. They might be. They might not be. Jury's still kind of out because there haven't been any long-term studies done on it because we haven't had them that long. But GMOs stand for genetically modified organisms. They are specifically genetically modified to resist a spray chemical called Roundup. You guys heard of Roundup before? Okay. So you have wheat, we'll say, that would be sprayed with Roundup and die. So how do we make it survive? In the seed, we put a gene in that makes it hardy and resistant to Roundup. Great. Now we can spray a field of this type of wheat, and it will kill all the other weeds except for that wheat. Again, questionable whether the insertion of that gene has health effects on us. We don't know yet. But we do know that glyphosate, Roundup, is really bad. So if something says that it's genetically modified, it's been sprayed with Roundup. So what exactly does that do? Well, they looked at intestinal cells. So if you look in the top right, that's the control. See how the intestinal cells are all right up next to each other, exactly like I said it should be? When in glyphosate, Roundup is infused in that solution of intestinal cells, look what happens. They completely break apart and create this leaky gut. So 1990s here, I know it's a little tough to see, but 1990s here, this is basically when Roundup started. And it really started ramping up in the late 90s. And now we spray the heck out of our crops with this glyphosate. And this black line here are deaths due to intestinal infections. Look like it kind of tracks together? So when you're making decisions, do I buy organic or do I buy food that potentially is genetically modified or sprayed with chemicals, use this chart. It's called the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. The Dirty Dozen are the 12 foods that are most sprayed with chemicals, with pesticides. So strawberries, apples, grapes, cherries, pears. If you notice, every single one of those things, you eat the outside of it. You eat the outside of an apple, you eat the outside of a pear, you eat the outside of a cherry. The Clean 15 are predominantly foods that, yeah, they might be sprayed, but it's not really penetrating the parts that you're consuming. So pineapples. Show me somebody who eats the outside of a pineapple. Never met somebody. Avocados, eggplants, same thing. So use this chart at least when choosing your produce. It can definitely be helpful. Yeah, yeah. To some degree. Some of the pesticides are still absorbed through the skin of the apple. And I suppose the exact same thing could be said for even pineapples, corn, cabbage. Some of the chemicals are absorbed, but you are mitigating a large part of the risk. Yeah.
And buying organic gets around some stuff when it comes to Dirty Dozen.
Yeah, so, yeah. Good point. Organic produce isn't sprayed. And it's grown in soils that's not genetically modified or has anything. To be able to get the seal of approval, especially if it says USDA organic, which is that green little tag that you guys see, that means it's gone through fairly rigorous certification process to be able to say, yes, this is an unsprayed, clean product. Yeah. Yes, yeah. So there's a lot of ways to be able to get certification processes to get the certification basically and not be 100% truthful and transparent. Again, at the end of the day, farmer's market's going to be the best. No, that's second best. Growing in your backyard is the best. But yes, you are absolutely right. There are some companies and so forth that are putting a seal of approval on it, even though they're not meeting the highest standard possible, just making the bare minimum. Same thing could be said for chickens. For a free-range chicken, basically, it just needs to have enough grass to step outside, and it's free range. Yeah, that's crazy. So cage-free, free range, it doesn't mean anything. So farmer's market, chickens. Another cause of leaky gut. So under normal circumstances, when we're relaxed and we're sitting down, hanging out, there are two segments of the nervous system that are always in play. We have the sympathetic nervous system, that is our fight or flight, and then we have the parasympathetic nervous system, which is our relax, rest, and digest. If we're running from a tiger, sympathetic. If we're sitting at home eating, rest and digest, parasympathetic. So if we're chronically stressed out and we're eating really fast in the car on the way to the next appointment, we are eating when we're in a sympathetic state. In that sympathetic state, that nervous system is shutting down certain processes in our body that should be devoted to resting and digesting and properly breaking down food. That's not good. So we want to be eating, we want to be predominantly living in a state in our life where we're not stressed out. Nobody does that. So we need to be aware of that and implement certain things, certain techniques that can bring down that degree of stress. Because otherwise, we don't digest food appropriately. We have these necklaces coming in through our gut, and if we have any leakiness there, they're going to be absorbed. So everybody in here knows sweat power yoga. One of the best things you can be doing from an exercise standpoint and for reducing stress is taking time, like yoga, to engage that part of the system. You guys all know when you leave here, you're probably feeling 100 times better than you were when you first walked in. Parasympathetic versus sympathetic. So we talked a little bit about this, that SIBO. If we have a backup of this bacteria in the small intestines where we should be absorbing the nutrients, we have gas, bloating, and that pressure and those chemicals are also ripping apart these cells, causing leaky gut. Now, this is gross. This is an extreme example. Don't raise your hands in response to this question. How many of you have woken up in the morning and stick out your tongue and you have a white coat? Okay? Don't answer this question. That could be candida. So we all have candida in us. It's a yeast. It's a normal colonizer of our intestinal tract. But when we consume or overconsume carbohydrates, or we go on antibiotics, or we have any shift in the gut flora that would allow the candida to overpopulate, it can wreak havoc on our digestive tract, very similar to SIBO, and it can express itself in the morning on our tongue. So if that's you, you may want to consider taking simple carbs or excessive carbs out of the diet and going on a protocol to get rid of candida because it's linked with sugar cravings and leaky gut. Just putting it on the radar. So what are these symptoms? So we have this leaky gut. Great. We know how it happens. We know that foods are being absorbed intact. All these things are associated with intestinal permeability, this leaky gut. Inflammatory bowel disease, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, gas, Crohn's disease, food sensitivities, lupus, anxiety, ADHD, type 1 diabetes, arthritis, autoimmune diseases. What? Autoimmune diseases? How does that happen? Well, when we have that intact food protein, that necklace that's absorbed into our system, our body says, this is not us. Is it virus? Is it bacteria? Is it a parasite? It launches an immune attack against it. That immune attack starts by the production of something called an antibody. So an antibody is just a tagging molecule. It's like a paintball, right? It hits the person, splat. Now we know that this person, this protein, needs to be destroyed. And so all the other immune system cells come in, and they destroy this foreign protein. Great. That paintball, that tagging molecule, has a very specific structure here that attaches to the specific structure on gluten. Okay? Now gluten is tagged for destruction. Great. But what happens if that structure on gluten looks a lot like our thyroid, or our pancreas, or our joints, or our blood-brain barrier? Now all of a sudden, we are setting up a cycle of autoimmunity where a foreign food protein is causing our body to mistake our own tissue as foreign. And so we begin attacking itself. So it looks like this. We have gut inflammation, foods, foreign food proteins come in, our immune system is activated, and we develop this autoimmunity. So, I'm going to stop for a second. Am I making sense so far? I don't mean to be freaking you guys out. Yeah.
So I have, when we go back to one of the reasons for leaky gut,
Mhm.
It was grains.
Yep.
Grains, legumes, things of that nature.
Yep.
So I had read up and learned that soaking grains,
Hmm.
nuts, seeds, legumes will help to break down those phytates and lectins and make them more digestible. Is that helpful in preventing leaky gut and is it worth it?
100%. Great point. So, if you look at any indigenous society around the world, meaning natives that have evolved over time and passed down oral tradition of food preparation techniques. Every single one of them that consumes grains has a preparation technique just like you mentioned. And the reason being is that from trial and error, they've begun to realize that consuming these things that have not been partially digested, which those processes do partially digest outside of the body, wreak havoc on us. Okay, so what are the preparation techniques? Grains. You ever see like Ezekiel bread in the stores? It says sprouted wheat. Much better as far as phytates and lectins, which have already been broken down, than fresh bread that was just made and hasn't had any pre-digested parts to it. Sourdough bread. Better than other types of bread. Why? Because the yeast, when you're making sourdough, breaks down a lot of those hard-to-digest gluten proteins. So very, very, very good point. About the legumes. It's true, too, that legumes, beans, have phytates and lectins, also these anti-nutrients. So buying beans from a can that have been soaking for who knows how long is actually better than buying raw beans and then quickly making them yourself. If you do make them yourself, you should soak them, and I've never done it personally, but you should go through the techniques that you can probably find on Google to break down those things. Yeah.
I also read one that said, actually, there's two books that are there. One's the Plant Paradox, and the other one is the Stash Diet. And what she does with the legumes is she puts a little bit of Greek yogurt in it, soak overnight, and then cooks them. But they say if you put it in like an Instapot, you pressure cook it, it completely kills off the lectins.
Oh, good stuff. Thank you. Yeah.
So I heard that whole grain and multigrain, so say you are going to have bread,
Mm-hmm.
is whole grain, it's actually better than the multigrain?
Very marginal difference. Yeah, very, very marginal. It doesn't really make a difference. Yeah, whole wheat, 100% wheat, multigrain, whole grain, they're basically all the same thing. Yeah. Again, I'm not here to be the grain Nazi and tell you not to do anything like that. I just want to make sure that you guys are aware so that if you do have GI issues, if you're experiencing gas, bloating, pain, autoimmunity, any autoimmune conditions, dermatologic issues, maybe I'm going to try going on a gluten-free diet for a little bit. That's the purpose of scaring you up here.
With all of the soaking and everything like that, I'm going to now put my attention on soaking, correctly preparing the grains that are already gluten-free. So stay away from the wheat, rye, barley,
Mm-hmm.
and go towards
Yes.
quinoa, wild rice, things of that nature. Soak those to consume those and completely wipe out.
Exactly. So my recommendation for most patients, exactly, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be up here saying all grains are bad. That's not the case, and that's actually not how I feel either. Rice, brown rice, wild rice, white rice, quinoa, sweet potato, white potato, oats, which are gluten-free, all good. Those are all safe grains. I do recommend patients go on a gluten-free Mediterranean diet. That's the most studied diet in the world. I find that people do the best with that because they have the majority of options. They just take out gluten, which in the United States has been bastardized to a point where we don't handle it well, no matter if you have celiac or not. So very good point. Do you have a question?
Just that oats can be
You're right. They can be contaminated. They're sometimes produced in facilities that have gluten. It's usually not that. Yeah. So if it says gluten-free oats, oats normally are supposed to be gluten-free. Unless you have celiac, I usually don't find too much of an issue with just a little bit of cross-contamination. But you are correct. Yeah.
So kind of a question at that point, if you go mostly gluten-free, you have it once in a while, what's the impact on your body if you all of a sudden reintroduce it for one meal or 2 meals? Is it a stay away from it all the time or eliminate it 90%?
Great question. So what I have patients do is go bare minimum 30-day gluten-free diet. They usually feel pretty good. Then when they do reintroduce it, they don't feel great. So it's symptomatic. I'm not going to stand up and tell you here that gluten-free diets are the most tasty in the world because there's no replacement for pizza crust. So I know. But yeah, in answer to your question, it's all subjective and symptomatic. Most people consume gluten after an elimination for a long period of time, and they don't like the way they feel, so it's just positive reinforcement. But it's not going to get rid of all the progress that you've made by getting rid of it, or by doing it every once in a while. Yeah.
So when your patients or people put themselves on a gluten-free diet,
Sure.
Because I have celiac disease.
Mhm.
But how much do you think is really gluten-free versus they're eating real food instead of crap in boxes that has preservatives and
That is nutrient dense? Great point. Great point. I mean, in both scenarios, you're moving from potentially hazardous to your gut and no nutrient density to nutrient density. So it's a good point. You're basically asking, what the real difference is. Maybe my response would be, doesn't matter.
right, sure,
Yeah.
you feel better.
Yeah. That's a good point too. I will say.
People running out putting themselves on gluten-free diets
Mhm.
when maybe they don't need it, maybe they just need to eat food instead of boxes and things.
Yes. Yep. I will say that there are more people that have gluten sensitivities than realize it, and there are probably some people already adhering to a gluten-free diet that maybe have more resiliency than somebody else that could incorporate gluten every once in a while. But at the end of the day, it's not as though gluten offers you any nutritional value aside from palatability.
Is it fair to say to put your attention on educating yourself on foods that are naturally gluten-free and are real foods and to stay away from the gluten-free item? Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yep. Beautifully put. Perimeter of the grocery store. Avoid the middle aisles. Except for ketchup, everyone. So there are a couple of different ways to be able to analyze how's my gut doing. Food sensitivity tests, a SIBO analysis, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and a stool analysis. So a food sensitivity test, I run these. I actually ran this on myself. When I was in medical school, I was exhausted, probably for 6 or 7 months. I couldn't figure out. 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, I was crashing. A lot of people crash at 2, 3 p.m. in the afternoon, but this was different. I could put my head on my desk and just conk out. So I'm like, what's going on? Friends are like, you're just burning the wick out of both ends. You're going to CrossFit. You're doing work. You're blah, 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 blah. Just relax. I'm like, no, something else. I ran a test. Chicken, eggs, avocados, and spinach came back off the charts. So I said, well, to some degree, I'm eating most of those almost on a daily basis. So I took them completely out of my diet, and within 1 week, all fatigue in the afternoon was gone. So when somebody develops, I had leaky gut at the time because I was pretty stressed. When you develop food sensitivities, it's not a death sentence for those foods. You eliminate the foods exclusively for usually about 3 months, the amount of time it takes to flush the antibodies from the body. And then you do a systematic reintroduction, you can bring the foods back in. So now I can have chicken, and I can have avocados, and I can have spinach, and I don't have any issues. But I knew this test was accurate because number one, above everything else, was agave. And I never have agave. But anytime I've ever had a sip of fermented agave, tequila, I vomited a couple hours later. So these tests are unbelievable. I run it on people a lot of times with dermatologic reactions, eczema, psoriasis, rosacea, acne. Once they eliminate those foods, actually I just had a kid the other day, he came in, he's 17 years old, terrible eczema on his hands to the point where it almost looks like he was degloved, like sores everywhere. And he was wearing gloves to school because he was embarrassed. So I ran this test on him, and gluten came back off the charts, dairy proteins came back, but also some weird ones like chickpeas, rosemary came back. So he eliminated everything to the point where his mom even went around and put like green little stickers on all the products in their house that were good. And he just came back 2 weeks ago, and his hands were clear. I was even shocked. I couldn't believe it. And yeah, I mean, I was real proud of him because as a 17-year-old to go on a gluten-free diet and not have Subway with your friends is tough, but amazing. Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth test. You can have this run. You swallow a solution, and right before you swallow the solution, you breathe into this little vial. And the vial collects the type of CO2, any hydrogen that you might have in your breath. That's the baseline. Then you drink the solution, and 20 minutes later, 40 minutes later, an hour later, you continue bringing these tubes and cap it, cap it, cap it. What ends up happening is if you have this bacteria in your intestines and it's overgrown, it can take that solution that you swallowed, produce gases that then you expel through your breath. And so you get a tracking based on time, what type of gas is produced, whether hydrogen or methane, and it indicates as to where in the intestines this overgrowth is occurring. And then lastly, you can do a stool analysis. So this is my last resort when I really can't figure out what's going on. You can actually take a poop sample, and you can send it into a company, and they'll tell you exactly the type of microbial diversity, what kind of probiotics you have in your intestines, how well you're digesting food, what type of pancreatic enzymes you're making that then basically extract the nutrients out of the food that you are consuming. So this is the last resort, but also it offers a breadth of information when somebody has chronic GI issues. So when we do have gut issues, and the reason I'm also talking about this because, yes, it did come back a lot on those SurveyMonkey questions, but also I see this every day. We all have gut issues because we're all eating foods that are sprayed and have Roundup, and we're all stressed. So when we are going to restore the gut, we have to remove the bad thing, oftentimes junk food, sometimes a pathogen, SIBO, Candida. We have to replace our capacity to be able to absorb nutrients. So sometimes we take digestive enzymes, sometimes we take hydrochloric acid if we're not producing enough acid in the stomach to break things down. We repair it, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, and then we repopulate at the end with probiotics. So sometimes people will go on probiotics and feel worse, and it's because you're putting bacteria on too much bacteria. Not great. First, you got to figure out what's going on, get rid of it, and at the end, repopulate. So how can we help restore this gut? Under normal circumstances, when we're in that parasympathetic rest and digest, we have this wave that goes from our esophagus all the way down our digestive tract, and it pushes food towards the exit. That's called peristalsis. That's the normal situation of how it's supposed to happen. If we're hypothyroid and we don't have this normal contraction, it slows down, it can allow the bacteria that are in the last part of our intestines to creep back up and cause SIBO. It can cause a whole host of issues. So one of the things that we can do is make sure we're pooping every day. That's very important. Some people, a lot of people, when I talk with my patients, I'm like, how many times do you go to the bathroom? About 2 times. Okay, great. Per day? No, per week. Okay. Very important to go to the bathroom every day and expel the types of things that the body's trying to get rid of. That's very, very important from a bacterial standpoint in the intestines. And then the bacteria also produce different chemicals, like I talked about, that can then feed into our body and influence our immune system, neurotransmitters in the brain. So one of the things that we can do to help this motility, ginger. We hear about ginger settling the stomach. Coffee. I'm sure a lot of us know that when we drink coffee in the morning, 20 minutes later, we're ready to go. That's one of the things that can stimulate that peristalsis. And then we can provide mucosal support, so some of the things that actually coat our digestive tract and help those intestines heal. L-glutamine, zinc, and aloe vera juice. Now, if you ever see aloe vera juice, it should say latex-free. If you're trying to be all natural and make your own aloe vera and you get any of the green outer shell, you will be running to the bathroom. That's latex, and it goes right through you. So L-glutamine, most abundant amino acid protein in the human body. It nourishes those cells that line the intestines. Collagen protein has a ton of L-glutamine. You ever hear about collagen protein, bone broth protein? It's real hot right now. Basically, it's got a blend of amino acids that are very high in glutamine and help nourish the gut. So those types of proteins, very gentle in our digestive tract, very helpful for repair. We can take prebiotic foods. So we hear about probiotics. Probiotics are the bacteria themselves. Prebiotics are types of fibers in plant foods that our probiotics can use for energy. So pretty much think any green leafy vegetable, plenty of prebiotics that our gut can use to help support healthy types of bacteria there. And in the process, those bacteria produce this thing called butyric acid, one of many types of acids that they produce that are very anti-inflammatory for our body. So when we're talking about people with arthritis, different inflammation, chronic disease, having the right bacteria there in the first place and having good fermentable fibers called prebiotics that the bacteria can use are essential in reducing inflammation in the system. I think we're almost done. Fasting, also very important. So if you think every single time we have food coming down our digestive tract, our intestines are requiring different enzymes to break the food down. It requires a lot of energy to be able to extract these nutrients. Even just the presence of food can wreak a little bit of havoc because they're kind of sloughing against the intestinal cells themselves. So the more time that you give the intestines to repair, the better they're going to do. So that's why fasting can be so helpful. Most people are familiarized with intermittent fasting now because it's hot. So between the hours, I typically recommend for patients of 11 a.m. and 7 p.m., you're consuming food. So you may have a late breakfast, an early lunch, you may have a snack in the afternoon, you may have dinner, and you may be done by 7 p.m. Then from 7 p.m. until 11 the next day is 16 hours. And that 16 hours is allowing the intestinal cells that line our gut to repair themselves. And there's many different methods of doing this. You can do a 5-2, where you fast 2 consecutive days a week. Sounds terrible. You can go alternate day fasting every other day. Also sounds terrible. So there's many different types of fasts, but it basically allows the gut to heal and allows this thing to come active. It's called the MMC, the migrating motor complex. That's that peristaltic wave that I was talking about. So again, promoting gut health, organic foods, eat them because they lack pesticides. Vitamin D, this is your sunshine vitamin. Again, we're at a latitude where we don't really get enough. I do recommend that most everybody in New England supplement with vitamin D. Saccharomyces boulardii, if you end up having loose stools, I recommend this. This is a quick little yeast that you can introduce to the digestive tract that actually helps balance out the gut flora. It's not one of the bad yeasts like Candida. And again, there's that 80% between May and September. So the New England bundle, this is what I recommend really for everybody in New England. Vitamin D, magnesium, which we talked about, and omega-3s. We just don't get enough of the anti-inflammatory omega-3 fats that we oftentimes find in fish. And so I do recommend supplementing. The other reason is that the majority of the fish that we're unfortunately most local to, everything from the Atlantic seaboard, we've screwed up the waters here. And a lot of the fish are just toxic and have crap in them that then are in us when we eat them. So the few types of fish that I do recommend, shellfish, usually pretty good because they're small. The smaller the fish is usually better because it hasn't accumulated all the mercury and the toxicities from the fish that it's eaten. So if you look at the highest toxicities in fish, it's going to be tuna, shark, king mackerel, all these really big fish that have lived a long time and have had time to accumulate all these toxins in the body. Instead, Pacific wild-caught salmon is usually pretty darn clean. Sardines, yum, and shellfish. So last thing here, I just want to leave you guys on the endocannabinoid system. I'd also saw time and time again, CBD, tell me about CBD. I want to learn about CBD. Okay. So the endocannabinoid system is in us. Anytime you see endo, that means it's already inside of us. So we have this system inside our bodies called the endocannabinoid system. And we produce chemicals that attach to these cells, a part of the endocannabinoid system, that help bring the body back into balance. And that balance is called homeostasis. You guys heard of homeostasis before? When we get knocked out of balance, meaning that we experience too much pain, we have fibromyalgia, we are excessively hot, our blood sugars are out of control, the endocannabinoid system kicks online and it helps bring us back into balance. And we have different receptors all throughout our body. CB1 and CB2. CB1 receptors respond to these cannabinoids that we produce, and they enact a homeostatic, a rebalancing change. The exact same thing happens with CB2 receptors. They're just in different spots. So CB1 receptors we find a lot in the brain, the lungs, the vascular system, meaning the arteries and the veins. The immune system has a little bit, liver, bone marrow, pancreas. CB2, spleen, bone, skin. The main concentration is that CB1 is predominantly in the nervous system, so brain. CB2 are predominantly in the immune system. When we consume exogenous, meaning outside of the body, cannabinoids, aka cannabis, marijuana, we get THC, CBD, and a whole bunch of these other cannabinoids. THC predominantly binds to the CB1 receptors, which are in the brain, which explains that psychoactive effect that we get. CB2 can influence both. CBD binds to both, CB1 and CB2. CBD does not cause that psychoactive effect, but it can cause a lot of changes in our immune system, and that's why it's been touted as being a cure-all for so many of these different things. Anti-nausea, anti-cancer, IBD, fibromyalgia, da-da-da-da-da. So, when we have these imbalances, we have increased pain, increased hunger, dysregulated metabolism, we can't remember stuff, and impaired cellular processes because this endocannabinoid system isn't working well, so things are out of alignment, it can actually lead to cancer down the road. Again, so all those things, when they're out of balance, we can get Parkinson's disease, hypertension, diabetes, dysmenorrhea, which means PMS, basically, breast cancer, depression, migraines. So again, all of these things are associated with an endocannabinoid system that's knocked off kilter. And that's why taking CBD or using some of these other cannabinoids from cannabis can put so many of these things back into balance. That's why it's been touted right now as a panacea. So on the eyes, it helps act as a vasorelactant for glaucoma. On the heart, it's an anti-inflammatory, can prevent plaque buildup. In the intestines, it's an anti-prokinetic. So if people are having IBD, diarrhea, it can actually slow things down and bring things back into balance. On the stomach, it can help people who have a tendency to vomit or who are undergoing chemotherapy and feeling nauseous. It can calm that down. In the brain, get rid of anxiety. It helps uplift the mood, get rid of depression. So that's why CBD is becoming more and more popular because of this, so many different things, because it's acting on an endocannabinoid system that we were all born with. Yeah.